Hello, I'm Alexander Watkins. I'm a senior here at NAU in the ENV 425 course, and I'm going to be discussing the Arizona Groundwater Management Act of 1980 with you today. Now, a little bit of background information before we get right to the act. As you should hopefully know, the United States Southwest is a very dry region. Most of this region sees less than 15 inches of precipitation per year. You can really see this here in Arizona's southwest and northeastern corners. We don't get a lot of rain in the state, especially when you look at the Pacific Northwest or the south and eastern parts of the United States. Because we don't get a lot of precipitation in Arizona, we really rely on groundwater. About 40% of the fresh water in the state comes from groundwater pumping. And prior to 1980, there was no regulation on how much groundwater you could use. As long as you were using the groundwater that you were pumping on your land for some sort of beneficial or reasonable use, you were allowed to pump as much as you want. This led to issues in overpumping of groundwater, issues such as land subsidence, where the water table drops, the land itself drops because of that. It was also causing fissures in some parts of the states and on some farms. It also led to flow reduction in streams and rivers, since a lot of our streams and rivers are spring fed. The lack of groundwater, because it's being overpumped, it was leading to the springs not providing as much water for our rivers in the state. On top of this, around the 1960s, 1970s, Arizona was really starting to grow, and therefore we wanted to start the Central Arizona Project, which takes water from the Colorado River and sends it down to the center of the state, down to Lake Phoenix, which is why you have all these big canals with water in them in Phoenix. The state proposed Central Arizona Project to the federal government, requested funding. The feds said no, you don't manage your groundwater well enough. We're not going to fund this project until you can figure that out, which led the state to creating management laws. So, a question for my research was, what were those laws? How does Arizona manage its groundwater? What laws specifically are used to protect groundwater in the state? Who is benefiting from it? Are there laws that protect rural areas? Are there ones that just go after urban areas? Are both these areas kind of protected by the same law? How does this work? So, my research led me to the 1980 Groundwater Management Act, passed on June 12, 1980. This was a bipartisan bill, ran through a Republican Senate, a Democratic governor's office, and also worked with a lot of special interest groups in the state. This bill created the Arizona Department of Water Resources and established two management designations for the region: active management areas and irrigation non-expansion areas. Here we have a picture of then Governor Bruce Babbitt signing the GMA into law, surrounded by a lot of the legislators and public interest groups, or private interest groups, sorry, with a nice quote from the governor in an interview after the law was passed, saying, "Sometimes things have to get so bad that it is almost impossible to do anything more before people really come together," which really shows the soul of this bill, as everyone knew that we needed to protect our groundwater in some way, and political differences were set aside, and we were able to hammer out something that really protected the groundwater in the state. So how does it protect groundwater in the state? Like I said, the GMA creates active management areas and irrigation non-expansion areas. You can see here on this map, these green areas are active management areas, or AMAs. These orange areas are irrigation non-expansion areas, or INAs. Anything that is not green or white, or green or orange rather, it does not have groundwater protection. So you can see there's a lot of the state that actually does not have any sort of protection for its water. Active management areas are the strongest level of protection for groundwater in the state. These green areas cover about 80% of the population of the state. They are effective for managing groundwater because of the 6 key provisions of their existence. First off, if you want to pump groundwater in an AMA, you have to have a permit from the Department of Water Resources. You are not allowed to pump water for new irrigation operations. So like, if you want to start farming, you can't pump groundwater to irrigate your farm now. Areas that had been pumping water for at least 5 years before these AMAs are created get grandfathered in, and they are still allowed to pump their groundwater. In addition, each active management area has to create a management plan. These management plans are broken into 5 time periods. We'll talk about that in the next slide. Developer assurance for 100 years of water. So this means that if you're a developer and you're trying to build, say, a new housing section in one of these areas, you have to prove that there is at least enough water to last for 100 years after you develop this area. If you can't assure that there is going to be 100 years of water, you will not be allowed to build. If you have a well that is pumping over 35 gallons per minute, it must be metered. It's a pretty simple one. If your well pumps less than 35 gallons per minute, you don't have to. But honestly, I think that you should have to meter any amount of pumping. But it is what it is. Annual reporting of groundwater usage is exactly as it sounds. If you're taking groundwater out, you need to report how much you're taking out to the Department of Water Resources. Now, we currently have 6 different active management areas in the state. When the Groundwater Management Act was initially created, we only had 4: Prescott, Phoenix, Pinal, and Tucson. 1994, Santa Cruz AMA broke off from Tucson and became their own little section. And in 2022, the Douglas INA was upgraded into an AMA. And like I said in the last slide, each AMA has a specific management goal. Prescott, Phoenix, and Tucson, their goal is to simply maintain safe yield by the year 2025. Safe yield meaning that they are not pulling out more groundwater than is being naturally replenished into the aquifers. Pinal AMA, both safe yield and the preventative damage to the water tables. Santa Cruz AMA, safe yield and long-term damage to the water table. Sorry, Pinal is preserve agriculture and groundwater. So safe yield is not for the Pinal AMA. The Douglas AMA both wishes to support its economy, it's a very agriculture-heavy economy, and the welfare of the citizens in the region. Now, these goals are achieved through 4 10-year plans and 1 5-year plan, which sounds a little funny, but it's just the first 40 years of the GMA's existence, you had a 10-year plan. Every 10 years, you had to update your plan and figure out how it's working. And then this last 5-year plan is from the year 2020 to the year 2025. Next year is 2025. So we should see how each one of these AMAs has achieved, or hopefully achieved, its goal in preserving groundwater. So that'll be exciting to see how they've done next year. Irrigation non-expansion areas are much simpler than AMAs. They don't have these 6 key provisions. They just have really 2 rules. You can't irrigate new land, and if you are using groundwater, you have to report how much groundwater you're using. It's that easy. These are the 3 INAs in the area. First 2 were established in 1980, Douglas, which is now an AMA, in Joseph City. Harkahala, I hope I pronounced that right, was established in 1981, and Hualapai Valley was established in 2022. So we can still establish AMAs and INAs. You aren't restricted to just the regions that were established initially in 1980. Now let's talk effectiveness. This is a very successful act. Here on the right, we can see a chart from the Arizona Department of Water Resources. This is 1980 when the bill was passed. You can see that before this was passed, groundwater usage in acre feet, it's spiking up pretty high. It's starting to be used a lot more. Here we have population growth. Here we have GDP growth. Now, you can see right here in 1980 when the act was established, we still have population and economic growth. However, water use drops pretty significantly, especially when you consider how fast the population is growing and how much economic growth we're having. It is incredible that we are able to actually lower our water usage despite a higher population, despite economic growth, which is awesome. This made Arizona, at the time, a leader in the Colorado River Basin for groundwater management. A lot of the states in the basin actually used the 1980 GMA to kind of formulate their own management plans for their states. In Arizona, provided you have enough signatures on a petition, you can add a proposition to the ballot. This is what both Douglas and Wilcox regions did in 2022. The Arizona Water Defenders got enough signatures to put Propositions 420 and 422 on the ballot to establish an active management area in these regions. Prop 422 passed and established Douglas AMA, which is why it's no longer an irrigation non-expansion area, why it's now an active management area. Prop 420 was supposed to establish an AMA in the Wilcox region, but did not pass in the polls. Therefore, that is still an unprotected region. This is extremely important because even though the state of Arizona does not have full protection for groundwater, we still have a method for establishing protection. And I think, and I hope, hopefully in the future, we can continue to establish more regions as active management areas. It just really shows that you can continue to protect regions that are not protected today. Some flaws, some gaps in the effectiveness of the 1980 bill. It's an older bill, 44 years old now. Arizona is the only state in the Colorado River Basin that does not fully protect the state. You saw there's all those white areas in the map provided by the Department of Water Resources. Those are areas that aren't protected. All the other states in the basin fully protect their state. If you do not live in an AMA or an INA, you essentially have no groundwater protection. As long as you are reasonably using the water, you can pump as much as you'd like still. This is an issue when you get to areas like Wilcox, where 90% of their water goes to agriculture. Since Wilcox uses about 90% of their water in agriculture, they are seeing issues in their groundwater levels dropping pretty substantially. Thousands of wells across the state that are not in protected regions are reporting drops in groundwater from 50 to 100 feet, which is an issue when residents of these areas have their wells run dry. So their options are either to fork out thousands of dollars to re-drill a well, or have to rely on water being driven to them. Agriculture operations that are using a lot of this water don't really have to worry about this because they have the funding to re-drill their wells and drill them deep. That way they don't have to worry about this issue at all. But for the average resident, they don't have that sort of money, so they're kind of in a really bad spot where they don't have the funding to re-drill a well, or they really have to take a massive financial hit to re-drill their wells. This kind of leads us into our conclusion. 1980 GMA for the time period was massive. It really helped the state grow. It maintained population growth, economic growth, without destroying our water tables. It also allowed for the federal government to fund the Central Arizona Project, which is now why we have canals running through Phoenix with a bunch of water. GMA established active management areas, irrigation non-expansion areas, which cover about 80% of the population of the state. If you don't live in one of these regions, however, you do not have protections for your groundwater. And while at the time, Arizona was a leader in groundwater protection across the Colorado River Basin, we have really fallen behind now that all these other states have full protection for their groundwater. It's obvious that we need to be doing more to protect our rural communities from agriculture operations. We should not be allowing businesses to destroy the water rights of the citizens that are living in these areas, especially when it is heavily affecting these citizens financially, when they either have to now re-drill their wells when they run dry or haul water to them. So, 1980 GMA was really great for its time. It's out of date now, and I really hope to see that we have some sort of more regulation established in the future. We have references for this research project. It was a really good time. I really enjoyed learning a lot about the way that we manage our groundwater in the state, and I would heavily recommend that you also look into how much we regulate water in the state, and if you can, a vote on more regulation in the state. Thank you so much, and have a great day.